I shared my rape experience with my best friend, seeking understanding, but she insisted I was wrong about it. Total disbelief. Throwaway due to sensitive topic. Trigger warning: sexual assault and rape, dear Reddit. First and foremost, I want to clarify that my intention in writing this is not to create a divide between us. We are essentially already in that place. Instead, I genuinely seek different viewpoints and recommendations, as I am starting to feel increasingly lost and unhappy. I do not wish to sever this friendship, yet I am also feeling exhausted. Some context: my friend and I became acquainted in 2021 while living in the same dormitory. Since then, we have both relocated and now live 2 hours apart by train. We exchange messages daily and typically converse once a week for around 3 hours, with our discussions often resembling deep therapeutic conversations. We share many similarities, including struggles with mental health, both of us working through codependency, as well as common interests and fundamental values. We engage in extensive conversations about discovering our authentic selves and provide mutual support in this journey. From the onset, it has been clear that I am more socially conscious than she is. Although she identifies as a feminist, we sometimes experience conflicts, as she can become very easily triggered by topics that are presented in a polarized or generalized manner. For example, she recently recalled something I mentioned early in our friendship during a particularly angry phase I experienced towards men and the patriarchy. I made a darkly humorous comment stemming from my outrage that they should all have their genitals removed. I want to stress that I am inherently gentle, cannot harm even the smallest creature, and I am a vegetarian. My comment was merely a coping mechanism for my repressed anger expressed through dark humor. Nevertheless, this has become a recurring issue between us. I make a joking or slightly generalized statement, which triggers her. I have previously acknowledged when my comments went too far, agreeing that while I see complexities in these discussions, some behaviors are undeniably problematic. Furthermore, this is the second major conflict we have encountered. The first occurred 5 months ago on her birthday, when I arrived feeling upset over an incident that transpired en route, causing her to feel overwhelmed and lead her to claim that I am emotionally manipulative for not gauging her emotional state. Now, onto the main issue. Please request clarification if necessary. I'm trying to convey this as neutrally as possible, but I must omit some details due to length. About 2 weeks ago, we had one of our emotionally charged phone conversations. We discussed lingering feelings for past partners, and I shared that I remained affected by a brief relationship I had 2 years after ending my first serious one, as I was still emotionally scarred and continue to be. I began to express my feelings of shame about referring to a past incident with my first boyfriend as rape, which I have always described in vague terms. This event occurred in 2013. While I do not recall every detail, I clearly remember feeling disregarded when expressing my needs, ultimately lying beneath him in a numb state and observing him being completely engrossed in his own experience. The following day, she texted me to express her discomfort with what I had shared during our call. Though she was uncertain about the reasons, she mentioned feeling compassion and disturbance regarding what I had gone through, noting it as a crime and suggesting I should file a police report. Furthermore, she indicated that this had led her to question her own experiences, sparking internal conflict. This last point seemed to take precedence, as a week later, when I thought we had resolved the topic and identified her trigger, she messaged me stating she was still struggling with it. A few days later, we had another call, and as someone who is recovering from people-pleasing tendencies, I took care to document what I was willing to discuss and set my boundaries. Given that this topic strikes very close to a personal and vulnerable area, I shared in confidence. She began by asserting her intention not to shame me, then proceeded to assert that it was incorrect for me to label my experience as rape, sharing that her own similar experiences were not the same and stating that based on what I described, he was not aware of his actions. She continued to argue that, because I was young and lacked knowledge, I could not blame him. I cited a website I had shared with her earlier that provided a definition of rape centered on consent rather than consciousness, but she disregarded it. I doubt she even accessed it. I attempted to communicate that it was acceptable for us to have differing definitions, redirecting our discussion toward the disagreement on terminology and the origins of her triggers, emphasizing that she has no right to judge my personal experience that occurred over a decade ago and involving a person she has never met. Yet, she continued to discount this and attributed assumptions about my motivations and views based on my choice of terminology. This was when she began discussing the significance of words, with which I concur, having earned a degree in cultural translation. But she then brought up that grotesque joke I made years ago when I was in a vastly different state of mind and affirmed that, "It appears that you are manipulating me because I am very tolerant." At that moment, I lost my composure and expressed disappointment that I had hoped our discussion would take a different direction, wanting to focus on her feelings, and yet it felt like she was not interested in that. It seemed as though the only way for me to pacify her would be to affirm her perspective and deny my own. I tried to clarify my boundaries, but she ignored my attempts and continued. I ultimately became very articulate, albeit frustrated, striving to maintain my composure while firmly asserting my boundaries. She fell silent and indicated a desire to end the call, which I was perfectly fine with if the only alternative was a repeat of the previous discussion. Afterward, she sent another message criticizing me for making false accusations and questioned how I would feel if someone were to declare that I was a rapist or similar accusations that I have never even hinted at. I responded, questioning her reasoning and the origins of her statements. She persisted, leading me to refrain from further replies as I felt completely dismissed, misinterpreted, and disrespected. The following day, I was still upset, but I contemplated that mentioning a previous wound of hers might trigger her further, so I reached out to ask how she was doing. Our conversation became elongated due to slow responses, and after a few texts, she messaged me again the next morning, reiterating her initial accusations, stating this was her authentic self, albeit partially, as she still felt like she was treading carefully, as she had felt throughout her life. At this point, I felt genuinely hurt because I perceived that my viewpoints were dismissed entirely. I wrote a lengthy message, articulating my feelings and observations of the situation. In response, she accused me of positioning myself as a victim and her as the aggressor. I urged her to reflect on whether she believed her treatment of me had been respectful and fair, to which she replied that she had. That conversation marked the conclusion of our exchanges. Yesterday, she sent very few messages, but it seemed she might be experiencing a slight reduction in her emotional reactions. Today, I have not received any messages. Currently, I find myself in a state of unease, having awakened in the middle of the night with a sense of despair akin to experiencing a breakup. My thoughts are racing, suggesting that I may be running out of options, and that even if we navigate through this, the issues may resurface repeatedly, leaving me feeling mentally strained and unable to cope with this ongoing drama. I decided to send her a text to explore a thought I had, attempting to understand her better rather than making presumptions. The thought was that perhaps her disorganized attachment style is causing confusion regarding whether she can trust me, drawing on shared experiences we have discussed recently. No response yet. Further updates may follow. For now, am I the asshole? And regardless, what should I do? I am at my wit's end. Thank you in advance. Story 2. I asked my mom for help with chores, and she screamed at me. Now I'm considering moving out. Am I wrong for wanting to escape? This requires a significant amount of context. My mother, who is 40 years old, had me, now an 18-year-old female, when she was between 21 and 22. My biological father, whom I will refer to as Gollum, is currently 47 years old. During my mother's pregnancy, Gollum behaved terribly towards her. For instance, when she would wake up in the middle of the night to vomit, he would rise and yell at her to vomit quieter, because she was disturbing his sleep. They divorced when I was about 7 to 9 years old. I apologize for the lack of clarity, as my memory is a bit hazy. And Gollum made it clear that he wanted to hurt my mother as much as possible, even if it meant causing me pain. He even expressed this to my grandmother. To illustrate Gollum's character, he attempted to kidnap me when I was 9. When my mother miraculously intervened, he brutally struck the back of my head several times against the elevator wall we were in to prevent her from reaching me. At this point, I believe you can understand that Gollum is a narcissist and a harmful person. The unfortunate aspect is that he manipulated me so effectively that I regarded him as the best father imaginable until I was around 13 or 14. It was only then that I began to see him as a stranger, and even at that point, he inflicted pain on me. Now, shifting to my actual father, who plays a small but significant role in this narrative, he is around 40, I believe, and met my mother shortly after she divorced Gollum. They fell in love and appeared happy together, but I remained unaware of their relationship until Gollum informed me. He expressed his bitterness by saying, "That bad man took your mother from us. He stole her from me," essentially brainwashing me for months until I started harboring hatred towards my father. Fast forward to the present, my father committed suicide a year and 5 days ago. A lot occurred in the interim, and I am not particularly proud of how I treated him, but that is a separate matter. Months after my father's passing, my mother began dating her current boyfriend, who is in his 30s and has a 6-year-old son. Initially, everything seemed fine, perhaps not ideal for me, but as long as she was happy, I could accept it. However, after some weeks or months, she started behaving differently. To clarify, this isn't entirely new behavior. I just hadn't recognized it so clearly before, as my experiences with Gollum had overshadowed any slight improvements. She began to get angry with me more easily, asking for more than I was able to give, etc. She even stopped paying for my psychologist, despite me being in a difficult place and that therapist being the only person I felt I could confide in, claiming that I wasn't following her instructions and that ChatGPT is superior to a psychologist anyway. I am not exaggerating. Those were her exact words. Additionally, she spent more time with her boyfriend's child, treating him significantly better because he reminded her of me and of what she was unable to do with me. I am currently in my final year of school before college, equivalent to segundo de bacalaureado in Spain, which is extremely challenging, particularly as I am grappling with depression, anxiety, and ADHD. Even if I were perfectly fine, it would still be difficult. We are living in a small apartment, and when we moved in, I was still on break, so I managed most of the household duties, cleaning the kitchen, living room, bathroom, and my own room, everything except her room, as I do not want to intrude there. One day, while doing laundry, I asked her if she could help me out with chores during my exam periods, and she simply refused, saying I could request her assistance with the laundry once or twice, but that it was ultimately my responsibility. And that's how it has been. I have missed several exams just to clean because, trust me, you do not want to see her reaction when the house is not tidy for whatever reason. I cannot attend class without facing verbal abuse if I have not cleaned the kitchen, my room, and the living room. Often, my mother will not allow me to study before I have cleaned. Not long ago, after one of our conflicts, she became furious and said things that have been etched in my mind ever since. I began to contemplate ending my life, a thought I have had before. I eventually confided in her, expecting her to be calming like she had been in the past and to offer me support. The following day, she appeared upset and told me that her stomach hurt due to what I had shared the day before. That was all. The same treatment continued as before. I remain here for my friends, and because I believe that is what my father would have wanted. 2 months ago, she began sobbing and complaining about how I did not do anything, how I lacked friends, which was a lie, did not have a social life, did little around the house, another lie, did not have a job, and wasn't studying as she wished. Recently, I began to socialize more with my friends. My grades may be slipping, but she no longer mentions my supposed lack of friends, a claim she made for several months. Now, she laments that my academic performance is not satisfactory. I do clean her home, take care of her dog. She would rather have the dog urinating and defecating inside than walk him, and that's not an exaggeration. It has happened, and she once yelled at me for not being awake when the dog needed to go out, even though it was before the time I set my alarm. And I try my best to maintain a social life and study based on what she permits me. I even looked for a job some time ago, but as you can imagine, I don't have the time for that. We are financially stable, so I don't truly need a job since I have some savings. Just a month ago or so, she began casually mentioning that I needed to stop studying and find a job as soon as possible because, according to her, I am not independent at all. As I mentioned earlier, it has been over a year since my father passed away, making both of us more sensitive this week. 2 days ago, I returned home around 11:00 p.m. after walking the dog right after school, and she was angry with me for some reason. Perhaps the dishes weren't clean as she wanted, and I noticed her sleeping on the couch. I felt worried because she never does that when we are alone, so I attempted to wake her. She told me she had to prepare dinner. I went into the kitchen, examined the fridge, and found a salad I recalled eating recently. I believed it was still fresh, so I served that to her. I simply had an omelet, and she expressed concern that it might not be good. I offered to make her something else, but she declined 4 times. The next day, she returned home early from work and saw the dishes in the sink. There were just a few, and I had wanted to study that morning. She spoke to me as if I were worthless, which is typical when she is upset. I cleaned the dishes quickly. It only took about 10 minutes, but that only made her angrier. Yesterday, she wanted to have a conversation with me before bedtime and began lamenting how I did not care about her at all, how I hadn't prepared dinner after noticing how affected she was, despite her repeatedly insisting she was fine, how she had to cut my hair against my wishes. At home, because she was appalled by how I looked, how I didn't wash the dishes, and how I needed to stop studying and start taking action. Now, I must clarify one last point. The last time I attempted to have a serious conversation with her, she insulted 13-year-old me, calling me a promiscuous girl who would engage in sexual acts for money, and she hit me twice when I argued against that. So, I am somewhat traumatized by that experience and tend to avoid discussing matters with her whenever she appears even slightly angry. After her lengthy monologue about my shortcomings and how I didn't love her, she went into the kitchen in tears. She is currently refusing to speak with me, and I am seriously contemplating moving out. However, I am unsure if I am genuinely causing her pain or if I am justified in needing to leave. So, am I the one in the wrong for wanting to move out? I genuinely don't believe I can endure this situation any longer, especially without knowing if I am truly the problem or not. Story 3. Teacher took us off campus for breakfast instead of a final, and we returned to find him fired. Talk about a plot twist, cooking astonished. This occurred in the early 2000s during my junior year of high school. The school district had just constructed the 3rd high school in our city, and the majority of the educators were new. The band director was among these new appointments. Although he was qualified for the position, he lacked interpersonal skills and was incredibly harsh towards the students. He had taught at the university level before, and could not grasp that high school students are not college-level music majors who spend all their time in practice rooms composing symphonies in their dreams. His typical behavior involved demeaning students for not comprehending university-level material, belittling everyone while expressing his disbelief at their incompetence, and interrupting rehearsals to embark on long-winded discussions about topics unrelated to music. Daily, at least 2 to 3 students would exit the class in tears. We raised our concerns to the administration, but they continually dismissed us. He made students despise attending his music classes, resulting in many leaving the band and orchestra. One of the courses he offered was labeled Introduction to Music Theory. For those unfamiliar with music, this class should generally cover basic concepts such as various types of chords, definitions of musical symbols, and the rationale behind key changes, among other topics. During the first class of the year, approximately 25 students enrolled, most of whom were aspiring music and drama students aiming to become teachers or performers in the arts. On that initial day, he handed us a quiz to gauge our knowledge. Only about 3 to 5 students could attempt even one question on the quiz, and none managed to answer correctly. That is indicative of its difficulty. Imagine enrolling in what you believe is a fundamental pre-algebra class and discovering you are in advanced calculus instead. This instructor spent the whole class berating us for our lack of preparedness, even though no one could manage to attempt his quiz. We explained, "This is an introductory class. We haven't learned anything like this before," to which he responded, "Really? I thought this was an advanced class." By the next class, only around 15 students were still enrolled. He repeated his approach, demanding that we perform something we couldn't understand, only to criticize us for not being ready. In every session, he would assert, "I thought you all were musicians. This is supposed to be an advanced class." By the end of the second week, only 6 students remained in the class, including myself. He softened a bit toward those of us who stayed, appearing to view us as his exceptional students and believing this was his elite class, similar to Professor Slughorn from Harry Potter. In reality, we all thought he was deranged and cruel, yet the 6 of us possessed enough musical background to grasp a small portion of his lessons. Without the grading curve, we would have all failed his class. Several months passed, and we approached the conclusion of the first semester. At this point, every student connected to music in the school had developed a strong dislike for him, and repeated complaints had accomplished nothing. The administration merely filed our grievances without taking further action, aside from reminding him to be kinder to the students. He made no changes and continued to berate students, often leaving them in tears. When it came time for the final exam in his theory class, he decided to administer it early so that we could have a class party on the designated day of the exam instead. Of the 6 of us remaining, 4 had a subsequent period together, which was Advanced Placement English, as we were preparing for the AP test. We had no objections to a class party in music right before the AP prep exam, so we did not complain. On the day of our music final exam, after we completed the test, he informed us that, for our class party, he intended to take us for breakfast at a new IHOP that had recently opened 20 minutes away. His class was during the first period. We attempted to convey the problems with this plan. We were not permitted to leave campus without signed permission slips, due to a past incident where a student who left campus for lunch was struck by a vehicle and tragically killed. We would not return in time for the second period, during which we had a final exam. He lacked permission to remove us from campus, and we worried about the potential for emergencies while we were unaccounted for off campus. His solution was to inform us that after the start of class on our last day, he would be going to IHOP, stating it was our choice whether to join him. But if we chose not to go, we would have to remain in the classroom and avoid drawing attention to the fact that there was no class or instructor present. Without discussing it among ourselves, we, the 6 of us, recognized an opportunity to finally draw the administration's attention to this teacher's complete disregard for rules and protocols. We made sure to notify our English teacher that we might be late for class on the day of the final due to a field trip for music theory. She was annoyed and reminded us of the importance of the final exam, stating she would not grant us extra time should we arrive late. We told her we understood and provided details about our whereabouts, activities, and who we would be with. Despite this, she still expected us to be present in her class. On the final exam day, we all went to IHOP. Our journey took much longer than anticipated due to construction, and we also waited an extended period for our food, as the restaurant had just opened and was packed with customers. We returned to the school midway through our second period class. The administration was waiting for us. Security was also present. My English teacher had contacted the front office complaining that 4 of her best students were absent and expressed her suspicion that we were not even on campus. The administration checked attendance and confirmed we were all marked as present that morning. They had searched the entire school looking for our class. The 4 of us walked into our English final to a furious teacher. We realized she was angry with us, but could not penalize us beyond informing us that we had the same remaining time as the rest of the class, since we were with a teacher during our absence. None of us performed as well on the final as we might have with the full 87 minutes to complete it, but we were doing well enough in the class that the lower scores did not significantly affect our overall grade. The band instructor received a private reprimand that was so loud the entire school was aware of it. He was puzzled as to why the administration was upset about taking minors off campus without permission or notice, lacking proper school transportation, or even a valid reason. He maintained his typical attitude, but this time directed at the administrators, questioning, "Why are you all so incompetent about this? They are old enough to drive. What's the problem?" The English teacher, whom I genuinely admire and consider one of the best educators I've ever had, fiercely defended us against the administration, questioning how they could continue to employ someone who so disrespected fellow teachers that he deprived his students of their final exams and exposed them to potentially dangerous situations. He insisted that we had to drive ourselves to the restaurant and that any accidents or health issues would be the school's responsibility. He was terminated later that day. Many students reacted with mixed feelings, experiencing both joy and confusion, as the six of us did not discuss the situation with others. Most were merely aware that this tyrannical teacher was no longer present. We did not share our story widely out of fear of repercussions for our involvement, as he technically offered us the option to either join him or remain behind. Nonetheless, I always felt a sense of satisfaction when others speculated about what ultimately led to his dismissal. Summary: a difficult teacher instructed us to leave campus with him for a class celebration. We complied, and the school district subsequently dismissed him. Story 4. Richard messed with my daughter at a BBQ, leading to a false child neglect report. Now, he's in legal trouble over his own bad renovations. I have an acquaintance named Richard who has always subscribed to the belief that he possesses superior knowledge. To make matters worse, he recently earned his doctorate in philosophy and physics from one of the top universities in my country, so it is evident he is intelligent. However, the issue is that he believes his expertise in physics grants him authority on every subject. For instance, my children attend Montessori schools, a choice my wife and I made together, and we are very satisfied with our decision. When Richard found out, he launched into a lengthy diatribe about how we are wasting our money and that Montessori is merely a fad. I informed him that I had researched and even professionally translated studies that validated the effectiveness of Montessori methods, providing real-world examples such as Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, and Larry Page, yet he refused to acknowledge that he might not be entirely right. This is not the focus of my grievance, but serves to illustrate the type of person he is. It is also significant to point out that Richard does not have Asperger's syndrome or any related condition. We often joke about this, and he has been thoroughly evaluated. He simply happens to be very intelligent, socially unaware, and quite bothersome. Considering all of this, I try to limit my interactions with him, but unfortunately, that is not always feasible. Last week, we both attended a barbecue for a mutual friend, Jack, who was visiting from abroad. I have known Jack since elementary school, so we brought our families along to make it a meaningful gathering rather than just a casual, long time, no see, meet up. At one point in the afternoon, my eldest daughter, Awesome, who is less than 10 years old, approached me looking very upset and expressed a desire to return home. When I inquired about the reason for her distress, she revealed that Richard had spent 15 minutes explaining to her why she should not consume hot dogs, elaborating on their ingredients and unhealthiness. Awesome is not a vegetarian. She understands that the beef and chicken she eats once belonged to living animals and has never shown any interest in adopting a vegetarian lifestyle. Moreover, children do not typically want to know the specifics of what they are eating when they are simply enjoying a hot dog. After we spoke for a bit, I reassured her and advised her to disregard Richard and join her siblings and friends in play. Thankfully, she was easily distracted and moved on. I chose not to escalate the situation with Jack or with Richard, which turned out to be a poor decision. About 30 minutes later, I heard Awesome scream and break into tears. I hurried to her side and discovered that Richard had approached her and knocked the hot dog from her hand, declaring that she should not eat such rubbish. I handed Awesome to my wife for comfort and took Richard aside to express my disapproval. I told him that it is unacceptable to speak to someone's children without their consent, b. teaching someone else's children without permission is not appropriate, and c. under no circumstances should he ever touch another person's children without their consent. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt since he does not have children, but this, once again, proved to be a mistake. Rather than act maturely and move on from the hot dog incident, he chose to persist in his crusade against them. He was determined that my children should not be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged from Richard and told him to stay away from my family. For the remainder of the afternoon, I kept a close watch on him, and he did not approach them again. Jack enjoyed himself, we all savored some delicious food, and I considered that to be the end of the matter. This, as it turned out, was also a mistake. A few days later, we received an unexpected visit from a child protection officer who accused us of neglecting our children, specifically Awesome. After coming inside, she observed that while the house could have been tidier, which house with children is spotless. Everything was perfectly fine. She spent a few minutes with Awesome, asked her a few questions, determined that all was well, and left. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer friend of mine just to be cautious. He assured me that it seemed we were in a good position, but advised that we should maintain communication with him just in case. Next, I began to investigate through our network of acquaintances. It appeared that Richard had taken offense at how I addressed him following the hot dog incident, prompting him to file a baseless, anonymous report. True to form, Richard discussed the matter as if it were something commendable. To confirm the situation, I decided to confront Richard directly. I set my phone to record and visited his home. He reaffirmed his stance, stating that we were mistreating Awesome, openly confessed to having contacted the protective services regarding us, and indicated he would do so again without hesitation. This also turned out to be a mistake. Although I am not prone to violence, I felt an overwhelming urge to confront him physically. I warned him that if he came near me or my family again, I would seek a restraining order, ensuring all of our mutual acquaintances knew exactly why. Listening to the recorded conversation in my car, I found his admission regarding the false report to be unmistakably clear. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who stated that he would begin the proceedings with his contacts at the public prosecutor's office to see if we could bring Richard to justice based on his own admission. We are still waiting, as sometimes legal processes move slowly. Then, I laid my plan for revenge. After earning his doctorate, Richard boasted about the new apartment he would be moving into upon selling his current one. He renovated the majority of his current apartment, incorporating numerous new and costly features that required extensive electrical work. He attempted the same renovations in the new apartment, undertaking much of the electrical work himself, which is clearly inadvisable without licensing. I arranged for an inspector to review both of his apartments and asked for certification regarding the electrical work completed. Unsurprisingly, no certification existed. It would not surprise me if Richard, in his typical fashion, argued with the inspector about the quality of his work, insisting he did not require someone else to handle it for him. Since then, I have not encountered or communicated with Richard. However, I have learned that he was compelled to engage a certified electrician to inspect all changes he made in both apartments. This necessitated disassembling everything and undergoing thorough examinations. The buyers of his previous apartment were dissatisfied with the delay in obtaining the keys, and even more displeased once they discovered the reason behind it. Consequently, they backed out of the deal and are pursuing legal action against him. Because his sale fell through, he is now struggling to pay mortgages on both apartments. I cannot ascertain if a fine was imposed on him, but I sincerely hope there was. The moral of this story is clear: one should never interfere with another person's children.